my place, but I know that it's our global webinar, and good morning, good afternoon, or even good night for all participants. My name is Rodion Sulenziga, and I'm indigenous person from the Russian Eastern Siberia. And today I'm serving in my capacity as a former chair of the Global Coordinating Committee on the summit, and also as a chair of the summit on just transition and indigenous peoples. And welcome and thanks for your commitment and for your time to join us today. It's a very important meeting. Before we move to our program, I would like to make some housekeeping announcement. The meeting will be held in 3 languages. The working language is English, followed by simultaneous translation in Spanish and Russian. And please use the bottom as a down and choose your language. And also, I would like to ask all participants to identify and introduce yourselves through our chat. Very briefly, your name, your organization, your nation, and your region. It will be so helpful for us to have a dialogue. We are having already more than 200 participants, so which demonstrate the importance and relevance of the meeting and the issue discussed. And we will have 1 hour and 30 minutes. I know it's quite a short time for this big issue. That's why we would be very focused. And in terms of our program, we'll provide the opportunity to all 7 social cultural regions to bring their own prospect, challenges, and solution under the green economy and just transition. And also, let me express our great gratitude to the Global Committee representing all 7 regions and our partners, SIRGE Coalition, for great and fantastic team working in Geneva. Why the summit, Indigenous Summit on Just Transition now? Because you know that more than 10 years ago, under the Paris Agreement, there was a state and all stakeholders' commitment to move from fossil fuels to so-called green economy. And since that time, the concept of green economy just transition has taken center stage. But while it speaks of sustainability and innovation, it is also still a risk repeating the mistake of the past: exploitation, inequality, and the silences of those who have protected lands for its nature for centuries. So this summit was a time for indigenous peoples to get together and to assert the rightful place in this conversation, and to make clear that any transition to green economy must also be a just transition that respects our lands, our rights, and our values. And the goal of the summit was quite clear: to bring all 7 regions, all indigenous peoples representatives, trying to develop unified position paper on how indigenous peoples envision and contribute to just transition economy. And the second goal was also to provide space for dialogue between right holders and other stakeholders, including state parties, United Nations mechanism, other NGOs and big associations, because it's a long-term agenda. And the summit covered 5 key points. The first one, to evaluate green economy trends and challenges the indigenous peoples are facing with. The second one, also to elaborate and to develop indigenous peoples' values, vision, but also to monitor the threat of colonization in the green economy. And the third point was very strong and very critical, focusing on minerals and the green economy, because we know that so far critical minerals are essential for renewable technology and energy. And the fourth issue was focusing on global south and global north, again, to avoid injustice and ensure a fair distribution and responsibilities and benefits. And the fifth topic was quite broad, including agriculture and many other issues, because just transition and green economy cover a lot of things. And in my introduction, I would like to emphasize that the summit represents a new chapter in the history of indigenous advocacy. It is more than a gathering of voices. It is a collective call to action, a declaration of principles, and a blueprint for justice. And the protocol developed, emerged from the summit, is not just a statement of ideals. It is a transformative tool of global significance. And the roadmap for action that calls on all of us to take the next steps, from government to align policies with the principle of justice and sustainability, from private sector to ensure their practices respect indigenous rights, from donors and philanthropic to support capacity building initiatives, and civil society to continue amplifying indigenous voices. And only together we can turn this vision into reality and set a global precedent for just green economy that benefits everyone. So, and I would like to invite and to encourage all speakers to share with us all your knowledge and experience taken from the summit, but also based on your regional prospects and regional challenges you are facing with. And first speaker I would like to invite is Galina Angara. Please introduce yourself, Galina, and you will have 7 minutes to present the outcome document of the summit. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rodion. My name is Galina Angara. I come from the Abzai clan of the Hirt Nation of the Buryat peoples in Siberia. I greet you from the traditional lands of the Multnomah people in Portland, Oregon. I serve as executive director of the SIRGE Coalition. We are a coalition of indigenous leaders from all 7 socio-cultural regions of the world and trusted partners that include organizations Botany Fund, Tallgrass Institute, Cultural Survival, Earthworks, Society for Threatened Peoples, and the International Working Group on Indigenous Affairs as an affiliate member. First and foremost, I would like to say thank you for joining us today. And I hope you are taking care of yourselves during these difficult times. And no matter how challenging it is or will be, please remember that throughout the history of human civilization, the lesson has always been that empires come and go, they rise and fall. Dictators and politicians also come and go, but people stay, communities stay. And this is why it is crucial for us to keep a long-term vision as peoples, as communities, and continue our resistance and relentless pursuit of justice, equity, human rights, and indigenous people's rights. We are at a pivotal moment in history as global initiatives to transition to new technologies are gathering speed. And countries and corporations are pouring huge amounts of funding into transition minerals extraction, development of renewable energy technologies, investments in electric mobility, and now artificial intelligence. There are reports that suggest that to make this transition possible, humanity will have to extract the equivalent of all extraction in all of its history. Moreover, countries are rushing to secure their supplies of transition minerals, placing communities amid a dangerous geopolitical competition, with numbers indicating that currently 54% of projects extracting transition minerals are on or near Indigenous peoples' lands. Meanwhile, extractive industries keep pushing harmful narratives that suggest that societies must accept that environmental and social impacts are inevitable because there is no other way to solve the climate crisis other than to mine our way out of it. Similarly, we are witnessing how large-scale industrial agriculture is compromising the integrity of the soil, putting our food sovereignty at risk. So there is a need to transition away from these harmful practices that only benefit in lining pockets for just a few. So we came together as representatives of all 7 sociocultural regions of the world to collectively define what a true just transition looks like for Indigenous peoples. So please read the outcome document if you can. And I also want to ask to copy and paste the outcome document in the chat. This is what Indigenous self-determination looks like in practice as we chart a pathway to our priorities in this new context. So from this document, I would like to read the vision and meaning of just transition that we collectively defined at that meeting. Vision. For Indigenous peoples, a just transition means exercising our own forms of territorial governance according to our traditions and ways of life. To develop principles and protocols to guide the world towards healing from the multiple environmental crises as we face, to live in harmony with the natural world, and to ensure that our inherent role and responsibility is respected and supported through our own voices. Meaning, for Indigenous peoples, a just transition means exercising our own customary institutions and Indigenous peoples' governance systems based on our traditions and ways of life. It is a restoration of what we were, a return to wholeness, from the womb to our mother to the stars above us. It is our cultural right to be who we are, and our physical right to be healthy and have a good life, to be safe. We seek just transition until all of that is sacred is restored. We support global coordination, solidarity, and sharing of knowledge and experiences to inform collective advocacy for Indigenous peoples' solutions. The current implementation of the green economy and just transition often perpetuates colonial practices by violating Indigenous peoples' rights, disregarding free, prior, and informed consent. These activities are a rebranding of exploitative systems rather than genuine change. A true just transition requires a radical transformation of economic systems, aligning with Indigenous worldviews that prioritize sustainability, respect for nature, and cultural integrity. While concepts like co-management and joint management, co-jurisdiction, and cross-jurisdiction can sometimes protect ecosystems and involve Indigenous peoples in decision-making, they are often misused to undermine Indigenous rights. These frameworks can dilute sovereignty, fail to honor nation-to-nation treaties, and marginalize Indigenous authority over their lands and resources. For true equity, such mechanisms must prioritize and respect the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples as affirmed in the international and treaty laws, ensuring their leadership and consent in all processes. So the document contains 11 principles for just transition, and I won't talk about them in depth. I hope that our speakers can delve deeper in their presentations. But because of the time constraints, please do read the document and learn more. So the first one is right to life. The second is right to self-determination and sovereignty of Indigenous peoples. Third, decolonization. Fourth, reparations, land back, full restoration of lands, territories, waters, and biodiversity. Fifth, respect for Indigenous peoples' ways of life. Sixth, transparency and accountability. Seventh, historical reparations. Eighth, full protection of Indigenous peoples. Ninth, recognition of Indigenous peoples' roles and responsibilities. 10th, maintaining 1.5 degrees. 11th, rights-based approach to supply chains. The document also contains 10 commitments for action in implementation. Please read the document. I would like to mention the commitment number 8. In line with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 10, Indigenous peoples have zero tolerance with regards to any forced evictions, displacements, relocation, dispossession, expulsion in the name of any development, including green transition projects and the creation of protected areas, and need to formulate a development model which does not create displacement. We are disseminating this document very widely, and we'll take it to our communities as well. And we're prepared to advocate for the rights of Indigenous peoples in the new context. Finally, I want to say that we live in a time where our agency as individuals and communities has been systematically eroded. The industrial food system has hacked our microbiomes, our taste buds, dictating our cravings and preferences through engineered food and relentless marketing. Our likes and dislikes, our attention, and even our time has been colonized, leaving many of us addicted to and glued to our devices and technological fixes that disconnect us from ourselves and each other. And to reclaim our true agency, we must remember who we are at our core. We're beings deeply rooted in nature, not separate from it. Our bodies are extensions of Mother Earth. Our voices carry the echoes of our ancestors. And our purpose is to live fully embodied lives and on this planet, not through the lenses of gadgets or artificial intelligence, but through direct, unmediated connection with the world around us. It is in remembering this truth that we find power, our true agency, and our voice that Mother Earth speaks through us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Galina, for a very strong introduction of the summit outcome document, for your commitment, partnership, for your passion, and I'm sure we will move together. So before giving floor to all 7 regions, I would like to say that we will allocate around 30 minutes after all 7 presentations to have exchange and provide some space for participants. And we will start with Africa region. And my question will be quite simple to all regions. What does a true just transition look like in your region? And how do you see the summit outcome document will be implemented at the ground, regional, and sub-regional levels? And what are the challenges and prospects you are facing with in your region? So And please introduce yourself. I would like to invite Galina Angara. The floor is yours.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Rodion, for inviting me to speak on the issues of just transition in Africa and its impact on indigenous peoples in Africa. My name is Desalegn Kabede, and I'm from Ethiopia, and I belong to Gamo indigenous people. And currently I have been serving as the chairperson of the board for an indigenous peoples organization called Sahai Community Development Organization. As far as the just transition in Africa is concerned, and how the summit document is being translated in Africa on ground. I would like to briefly highlight and mention the fact on ground, the challenges that have been happening, the ways forward as the global community of indigenous peoples, because we need to take action, the collective action. So it requires our unity, our strengths, and our collective effort to create enabling environment and a safe future, better future for our indigenous communities worldwide. Africa is a very large continent with over 54 countries. And when we talk about the just transition, by the way, Mr. Brian, I would appreciate if you display the PowerPoint, because I've shared the PowerPoint to the organizers, so that the audience would be able to get some first-hand information while making a presentation. So when we are talking about the just transition in Africa, the continent is one of the very large continents. Thank you so much. The first page, please. Okay. So as far as the issue of just transition in Africa, it takes a unique form that reflects the continent's socio-economic realities and the environmental challenges and the needs of the indigenous peoples in Africa. And accordingly, it emphasizes on equity, poverty alleviation, and sustainable development, while addressing the historical injustices and ensuring that no one is left behind. These are some of the lip services and the statements that are mentioned under the official documents of our sovereign country executive or the government authorities. So what is the key aspect of the just transition in Africa? There is an attempt of the energy transition with inclusivity, moving from fossil fuels to renewable energy, such as solar, wind, and hydro, in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and other African countries, and the sustainable livelihood for vulnerable communities that might include also indigenous communities. And there is also some attempt to recognize the indigenous people's rights, and an attempt also to recognize their participation, not in the framework of UN RIP, but in the framework of like consultation, not effective participation in the framework of free, prior, and informed consent, which is clearly specified under the United Nations Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples. And another aspect is also there is an attempt for to ensure equitable resource management of minerals, forests, and water bodies, and to ensure the environmental sustainability, and also to address social and environmental impacts on extractive industries such as mining, and ensuring some benefit sharing mechanisms. And there is also an attempt of social protection measures and policy and governance reforms, which is fully top down, not a bottom up. I hope you might understand what a top down approach means. So this is all top down. So when it comes to see some notable examples of the just transition efforts of the projects in Africa, there are the projects, the transitioning coal-dependent regions, and like Mpumalanga of South Africa, and the community-led renewable energy projects in Kenya, such as around the Lake Turkana. There are also the large-scale renewable energy projects in Karanzate of solar plant in Morocco, and there are also attempts of government-led flagship project in Ethiopia, which is a Great Ethiopian Renaissance Hydroelectric Dam, which is the largest hydroelectric project in Africa, with the installation capacity of over 5,000 megawatts. And also there's a forest sector development program and sustainable agriculture initiatives through agricultural growth program. And there is also a project in Congo with the support of different global partners, including the Carter Center for Global Energy Alliance, for people and the planet, and also responsible business conduct and transition minerals with the support from the Danish. So just to highlight you what's happening on ground, how do these all major projects that are being implemented in the indigenous peoples' territories and the lands are impacting the indigenous peoples. So the indigenous peoples across Africa are significantly impacted by various projects, such as the ones that I have mentioned in the framework of just transition. For instance, there is a displacement of indigenous communities in Tanzania due to conservation and the carbon credit initiatives. There is also the issue of the inclusivity of indigenous Bayaka in the Congo Basin and the effort of conservation. There is also a debate over agricultural transformation in Kenya, where there is the issue of introduction of chemical fertilizers and ignoring the indigenous way of life. And also there is the issue of biodiversity credits and the carbon credit issues, and also the engagement of indigenous communities and the just transition issues on the minerals, and also there is also marginalization of the communities in the distribution of the conservation revenues and the revenues that are gained from the minerals that are extracted from the territories and lands of the indigenous communities. So when we're talking all about this, what are the major challenges that have been that the indigenous communities in Africa were facing? So the first challenge that we have been facing is lack of meaningful consultation and participation, taking the free, prior, and informed consents in the light of United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples. Here I mean that, for instance, the major projects that are implemented and the ongoing projects are taking place without the effective and meaningful participation, but the government says that there is a free, prior, and informed consultation, not consent. So consent is not taken into consideration here. So they consult, but regardless of the consent of indigenous peoples, there is the operationalization of the mega projects in the territories and lands of indigenous peoples. There is also marginalization of indigenous peoples and the benefit sharing mechanisms. There is a threat from the resource extraction projects. And also there is a lack of recognition of the right of self-determination of indigenous peoples, because almost majority of African countries have not signed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and it's not a convention. There is the difference between convention and the declaration. So although it is a declaration, almost none of the African countries have signed this declaration, and due to this reason, there is the tendency of no recognition for indigenous communities, although there are terminologies like self-determination, but not in the framework of UNDRIP. So many African countries lack formal recognition for indigenous peoples, resulting in their exclusion from policy frameworks related to just transition. And this lack of recognition hampers their ability to advocate for their rights and participate effectively in transition process. And there are also socio-economic vulnerabilities where indigenous peoples and communities are experiencing high level of poverty and limited access to education and healthcare. The indigenous peoples in Africa are one of the most ignored and the least recognized. So these are the major challenges that we have been facing. So as far as so taking this all into consideration, so if we triangulate the level of implementation of the outcome document of the Indigenous Summit on Just Transition, there is a lot of efforts that we need to do to ensure meaningful and objective implementation of a summit outcome because of the ongoing challenge that I have mentioned. And it requires the unity and the proactive engagement of indigenous peoples organizations, and the stakeholders, which is instrumental to initiate the bottom-up participatory and inclusive programs and the projects with the aim to ensure the right of indigenous peoples and to ensure the self-determined development of indigenous communities. Finally, I would like to conclude this presentation with saying just transition cannot be just without a meaningful engagement of indigenous peoples. So we need to be united, and we need to keep moving forward, and we need to keep exchanging the information, keep advocating for the right of our indigenous peoples wherever we are, and we need to put our hands together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lan, for your very informative sharing and strong conclusion. I already see some questions raised through our chat, and we will come back. And now I would like to give the floor to the Arctic representative, Gask Nilas, and also to highlight his role as the chair of the drafting committee during the summit. And
now, right. Okay, I'm Gask Nilas. I'm a member of the Sami Parliament on Norwegian side of Sápmi, where I'm a group leader for my organization, Norwegian Sami Association. I'm the vice chair also of the same association, and I'm a deputy member of the Sami Council. Currently, I'm living in Tromsø, and first I have to thank for the good presentation of the outcome document. It's a strong document. Well, the Arctic region is quite huge. It spans all the way from Alaska to Russia, So it's a wide area to cover. So I will only mention a few examples from Sápmi on how the so-called green transition is ongoing, or the unjust transition, and as I saw in the chat. There seems to be no just transition at the moment, at least in Sápmi. It's more of the same business as usual, and the ongoing greenwashing of destructive industries. Myself, I have been on the front lines, just both as an activist and also in the political bodies for over a decade now. And I work mainly with land defending and to fight destructive industries. For those who are not familiar with Sápmi, especially, we are a nation, the Sami people, a cross-border nation. We have to fight 4 states at once: Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. So we also have some problems and challenges. I will try to very briefly describe by 2 or 3 examples how this green new deal is affecting us. Wind power, I want to explain already now. Wind power is sold as a very green, clean energy, but in our case, wind power and wind turbines destroy land by the icing in the cold weathers we have. When we get icing on the turbines, it can throw ice rocks many 100 meters that can weigh up to 500 kilos. So it's a life and death situation, both for the reindeer and also for people. So the areas with wind power are basically destroyed, and they are often in the winter grazing lands. Well, the examples I will show, it will show all these are examples of free, prior, and informed consent not taken into account or violated, to say it out plainly. I will start with Nussir Asa. It's a copper mine in a fjord on Norwegian side of Sápmi, where they were granted this dumping permission to dump mining waste in the Repovotna, Repparfjord. We have been fighting this mining company now for, I think it's the 12th year. And quite recently they made an agreement with a Canadian mining company to try to go forward with the project. This is sold as a green transition and clean factory. Norway is, by the way, one of 2 countries still allowing mining waste in the sea in the world. One of 2 countries. We fought this company in 2021. We managed to stop them by making this protest camp and also raise awareness, and we got to gather some money to hire legal help, and by now they don't have their papers in order, to put it that way. And we also made a German copper factory to withdraw from the project. So it helps also with frontline work. The Fosen case is maybe the most known in our region. In 2021, the 2 reindeer herding districts won in the Supreme Court, and the ruling was that the power plantation is violating human rights. Even though they won, the state of Norway did nothing for 500 days. So the youth, Sami youth, together with environmental youth, went to the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy and occupied the hallway for 4 days until they were carried out in the night, a Sunday night. They were prosecuted, and I will come back to that. But the demonstration grew. Many thousand people were gathered in the capital. This is outside the national parliament. And in this picture, you can see the prime minister had to apologize to the Samis for violating human rights and also acknowledge that there is an ongoing human right violation in Norway. The case is still unresolved. And then we have the electrification case of Moltkut, which is a liquid natural gas plant in the Barents Sea. The electrification is sold as a green project because they want to take electricity from land to have power to the power plantation that produces the LNG. This is sold as a green project because it will be a huge emission cut in Norway. But the reality is they will only get to produce for many more years. And in my county, Finnmark, we have to bear the burden by that with all these new wind power projects. No consultation has been on that, and the Sami Parliament has also taken the state of Norway as a first time to the court to challenge that verdict, because there was no consultation, so no free, prior and informed consent. I want to bring you some breaking news also. Today, the youth that got prosecuted in the Fosen case, today they got the verdict in round 2 in the court, and the ruling was not guilty. So I'm very happy for them, and I hope that Norway now will stop this harassment of our youth. So to the outcome document as a closure here, I think it's a very powerful document, and we really need that document. On our end, we have sent it to the governments, so they are totally aware of the document. As I'm not aware of any comments by their side, but they are now totally aware of our position, and I'm very happy for the good work we managed to do in Geneva. But the cases I have shown, we really needed that document. We need to push forward. The cases show that the Norwegian government, they don't care about FPIC, they don't care about UNDRIP, they don't care about the ELO Convention 169, they don't care about their own Supreme Court rulings, they ignore recommendations from the UN, and all in the name of the so-called green shift. So we are in dangerous times. I want to thank Galina for mentioning that we are still here, and we have always been here. We have been here for 1,000 years before the states, and I'm very sure we will be here 1,000 years after the states also. So I will close that. We will continue to push forward and protect the land. We will thank the land, and we will leave the land as we find it. It's our obligation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Biaska, for very concrete cases and examples, and also some promising news and congratulations related to the court decision. And of course, we are sending our support and solidarity. And our next speaker, Aisha, and I would like to invite Lan Sherpa to share with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rodion, and congratulations, Biaska, for the win. And also thank you to Kaja and Galina for your very insightful presentation. Tasidale, greetings to all my brothers and sisters from the 7 socio-cultural regions of the world. My name is Lan Sherpa, and I belong to Sherpa Indigenous Peoples of Nepal. Currently, I serve as the head of the environment program of Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. Founded in 1992, Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact is the largest regional network of indigenous peoples in Asia, and we work in 14 countries. We represent a diverse membership, including Federation of Indigenous Peoples, Federation of Indigenous Women, Federation of Indigenous Youth, and we also now have members representing indigenous persons with disability. Over the decades, AIPP has been contributing to the global movement of indigenous peoples, serving as the focal point for the International Indigenous Forum on Climate Change, and also as the co-chair of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. To strengthen the participation of Asian indigenous peoples in international processes, we have been able to establish regional traditions and that is by organizing regional preparatory meetings before every climate change and biodiversity COPs. So this is where Asia Indigenous Peoples invite Indigenous peoples engaging on both climate change and biodiversity and facilitate a strategic discussion. Last year, 65 leaders of Indigenous peoples, including Indigenous women, Indigenous youth, Indigenous persons with disability, Indigenous journalists, and Indigenous lawyers came together in Nepal to strategize and amplify our collective voices for the COP16 and COP29. This collective approach is gradually influencing decision-making on climate change and biodiversity. Today, I must raise a critical issue, the injustice that Indigenous peoples in Asia face in the name of so-called green or clean energy projects. Asia, home to the largest population of Indigenous peoples, is very rich in biological and cultural heritage. Yet, it is also a region where Indigenous peoples disproportionately bear the brunt of exploitative energy projects. In Nepal, hydropower projects have displaced Indigenous peoples, severed cultural connections, and destroyed sacred sites of Indigenous peoples. Project developers dismiss the free, prior, informed consent as an obstacle to development, rather than honoring it as our foundational rights as enshrined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In India, renewable energy projects company has forcibly acquired Indigenous peoples' land for the establishment of a solar power plant. And that is again without obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent. This action constitutes a serious violation of the fundamental human rights, livelihoods, cultural identities, and dignity of Indigenous peoples. In Myanmar's Kachin state, rare earth mining is poisoning the lands and waters of Indigenous peoples, with Indigenous women and children suffering the most. Biodiversity is degrading, human trafficking is rising, and communities are left struggling to survive amidst long-term environmental destruction. The Philippines, the world's largest exporter of nickel ore for energy transition technologies, offers another grim reality. Mining operations in Zambales and Palawan have caused severe deforestation, water contamination, and health crisis. And I'm sure many of you have seen the recent report issued by Amnesty International that clearly shows how meaningful consultations was not done with Indigenous peoples and how Indigenous peoples were denied access to critical information on the environmental and human rights risks of those projects. In Indonesia, geothermal projects that are designated as nationally strategic are being forced upon the Indigenous territories, including Flores Island. And that is happening despite strong oppositions from Indigenous peoples. These examples that I have shared with you were also the ones that were presented by Indigenous brothers and sisters in Geneva meeting. And what this shows is a very systemic injustice. Governments and corporations treat Indigenous peoples' territories as commodities, ignoring our rights, voices, and well-being. And despite the widespread adoption of UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples by Asian states, the political will to uphold the rights of Indigenous peoples remain alarmingly weak. With the UNFCCC COP28 decisions to triple renewable energy capacity globally, the human rights violations and the environmental destructions tied to energy projects may escalate threefold. This trajectory is catastrophic, not just for Indigenous peoples, but for the humanity and the planet. If we are truly committed to achieving the 1.5 target of the Paris Agreement, the 23 targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development goals, we must act decisively. 1. Governments are in the process of revising their nationally determined contributions and National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan in 2025. Those governments must explicitly target to respect human rights and the rights of Indigenous peoples. Second, Indigenous peoples' principles and protocols for a just transition must guide energy, climate, and biodiversity policies. Exploitative practices of mining and extraction in the name of energy transition must end immediately. And let me be very clear, no energy projects and conservation activities should proceed on the lands of Indigenous peoples without obtaining our free, prior, and informed consent. I also call on the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, which we call it ICHA, to ensure that Indigenous peoples' rights are explicitly recognized in the ASEAN Declaration on Environmental Rights. This declaration must affirm our right to self-determination and the protection of our land, territories, and resources. Transitioning to low economies cannot and must not come at the cost of Indigenous peoples' lives and livelihoods. For us, upholding the rights of Indigenous peoples, especially securing the collective tenure rights of Indigenous peoples, is non-negotiable. A truly just transition cannot happen without respecting the self-determination of Indigenous peoples. Our lands, territories, and water are not commodities for profit. They are our homes, our heritage, and vital solutions to the global environmental crisis. By respecting and recognizing Indigenous peoples' rights as rights holders and equal partners, and fostering trust through genuine partnership among Indigenous peoples, government, companies, and all relevant actors, we can collectively lead path towards a transition to low economies that prioritize nature, culture, and people over profit-driven extraction. Thank you very much, and back to you, Rodion.
Thank you very much, Lakba, for strong message. It's very well noted and heard, I'm sure. Next speaker is, I would like to invite Jacqueline from Central and South America and the Caribbean. Please, Jacqueline, the floor is yours. For those who need interpretation, please use the button below. Yes, Jacqueline, please.
Mari, bueno, soy Jacqueline Curaqueo del Pueblo Nación Mapuche y
I
presidenta del
am
Centro de Estudios e
Jacqueline
Investigaciones Comunitarias
Curaqueo. I
Mapuche
am
y
president
otros
of
pueblos
the
indígenas de
Studies
América del Sur
Center
que
of
ejercen
Research on
políticas
the
de
Community
Calina
and History
Angara
of
la
Mapuche
representatividad
peoples. Here in representation
que conocemos nosotros como
of
Abya
my
Yala. Su
community. This
intervención
is
se
the
basa
region
en
that
los
we
principales
ourselves
elementos
know
discursivos
as
y
Abya Yala,
teóricos
and I am
conceptuales
representing
del
that
pueblo
region
más
as well.
representado que se realizó en Ginebra el 8 y el 10 de
This
noviembre y con los debates posteriores
summit that
hemos
was
sostenido
produced in
exclusivamente en la
November,
región.
and based on the results that we have obtained as a region, I am going to be presenting. Defining, we define just transition or green transition or blue transition as a paradox to perpetuate a system of extractivism that has degraded the Mother Earth and have criminalized our Indigenous peoples. In this sense, we sustain that no transition that affects and violates the rights of our Mother Nature could be considered truly just. In our deliberation, we have identified very specific problems in our regions. For example, the lack of free, prior, and informed consent, as well it's been said by other communities that have spoken. For example, when it comes to extractivism that operates in our lands, for example, we have projects in Guatemala and in Mexico that have completely ignored this particular part of the process. They have criminalized, they have violated the life, and they have militarized the territory. So we have also faced forced abductions as part of this just transition. As a proof of that, and based on the studies that have been produced, our region has been a lead of the murders of defenders. Honduras, Mexico, they all lead the statistics of violence against those that defend our territories and our natural resources. We add to that the impunity, the threats, and the kidnapping of our leaders. Also, the militarization of our peoples. It is the case of the Mapuche people, where current governments have established exception states, like, for example, of governments like Sebastián Piñera, and right now with the government of Boric, that supposedly presents itself as an environmentally oriented government and have just aggravated the situation in our territory. We have 150 political prisoners that are people that land. We also have the disappearance of a woman leader. Since 2 months ago, she's been disappearing. She's disappeared. So the just transition that we are facing as of now, as Andino people, we call it it's been called as the lithium triangle. Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, and Peru, what we sustain, basically what we have 58% of the world reserve of lithium. That's why they call it the lithium triangle. This has aggravated the dispossession and the forced displacement of entire communities, as it is the case of the northern area of Argentina, where the Milei government has established constitutional reform in the Jujuy province towards the extractivism of lithium. In this triple climate crisis, climate change, the loss of biodiversity, the pollution, and the degradation on a large scale, this economy, this green economy, so-called, with clean colonialism, what we see is this sort of disguised oppression with disguised as sustainability that continues to dispossess our communities and our territories. Our peoples, even though it sounds rhetorical, are guarding over 80% of the biodiversity on a worldwide level, specifically Latin America region, the Caribbean, the Latin American region. I'm sorry, I'm losing signal. We hold 40% of the worldwide biodiversity in our region. We have always been ignored by the first world. We are so-called the third world, and we're never present in this discussion. So the history gives us reason that this civilizatory movement that was imposed through colonialism is not based, or is based in a model that has no future. What we propose, it's a model with our knowledge of life and the territory. We offer not really final solutions. We have many questions, but the solutions that are central knowledge and our cosmovisions may be present in this transition, in this just transition. And what we want to enhance here is that our self-determination, our territorial self-determination, becomes a practice, an executive and real practice, guided by our spirituality and our livelihoods. May they be a real consent consultation that is binding and that guarantees, through a genuine consultation, any benefit, so that it is guaranteed any benefit that comes from this project is shared. Also, the historic reparation and just reparation when it comes to the returning of the land. For example, due to the devastation, so many Chilean lands have been abandoned and put in the hands of other countries. So, for example, they come here, they leave devastation, and they go back and they go to another place. We need coordination and solidarity on a global level with the peoples towards the well-being that is social, that is economic, that is cultural. Also propose regional encounters so that we get to talk about adapted solutions. When we think about just transition, whatever is green and clean has to be against anything that deviates to discrimination. We really need a just transition that is different, not the one based through imposition as traditional colonialism, and also the extraction of what we can call green colonialism, and that this transition does not continue to consolidate a model of free market, and that it goes against neoliberalism, and it stops consolidating the inequality of the different sectors and all the communities that we have been left behind. It is important that our global discussions and the audience, for example, that is present in these global discussions, we take care of this and we take charge. And I would like to conclude by calling on a real debate so that our solutions are recognized as the base towards a equal transition based on mutual respect and the sustainability of the world. May this be real, and that the original peoples, we're not an obstacle, but we're also part of the solution, and we need to work along together, and that the transition is no longer an empty concept, but rather a respect of the rights of Earth.
Muchas gracias, Jacqueline, for your very rich sharing and strong conclusion. Very much appreciated. Now I would like to give floor to Eastern Europe, Russian Federation, and Central Asia, and would like to invite Amina. And please use the translation button. Amina will be speaking in Russian. Amina, вам слово.
Greetings. Greetings to all the participants. My name is Amina. I'm the Republic of Khakassia. I represent the Khakasian Public Environmental Forum called IRIS. I want to express my solidarity with the people of the Arctic and Sami who are fighting for their rights. All of your projects and the projects that we are realizing in indigenous lands, we are suffering as indigenous people. We are suffering as people inhabiting the lands where such extremes taking place. We are not enjoying the fruits of our lands. The Ministry of Environmental Resources of the Russian Federation has published a new plan for new energy projects in Russia until 2042. They are focused on increasing activity during this period. They want to increase the number of atom electrostations, of nuclear electrostations, and as a result, we'll see that the share of nuclear energy resources will increase dramatically. Hydroelectric resources will be about 15%. Solar resources will increase to about 3%. And the thermal stations will be more than 50%. The increase in this productivity will correlate with the increase of extractive industries in Russia, which has no place for indigenous agenda. The government is using propaganda, and everything does not fit this context. This narrative is considered to be and introduced from foreign actors, and we are now witnessing the propaganda of nuclear power as useful and forward-looking. We are living in lands where the company Rusal is producing aluminum. Rusal has a huge environmental agenda, so supposedly they are still selling their product, and as a result, our energy resources are quite expensive for the regular population. We are at the same time witnessing an increase in cancerogenic diseases and other harmful effects on people's health. My native village of Geneva is located in the region where extraction is happening, and as a result, the village is dying. We are seeing negative effects on indigenous rights and human rights of the people. Free, prior, informed consent is not applied, and the people who are able to escape this region are leaving on their own will. We see lots of abandoned houses. Coal extraction is going to continue happening as all the long-term plans for the extraction of coal are put in place. The sanctions, global sanctions against targeting the company do not matter. We see in the neighboring region an increase in the extraction of lithium. We see lots of infrastructure development connected to this extractive effort. Lithium extraction is introduced as a public benefit, as something that's with a positive attitude, but we see how Nornickel, Norilsk Nickel is carrying out its ongoing operations in the neighboring region, in Krasnoyarsk, for example, and other regions of Russia. It's very difficult to discuss any sort of fair transition, just transition, the negative effects on indigenous rights, on the inability to use FPIC, and all of the ongoing. We see lack of rights, we see endemic poverty in communities. Oftentimes we see there's the disappearing of certain groups altogether. And with that, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Amina, for quite informative sharing with us, and also underlining some specific of the region, particular nuclear station and large dams construction. So the next region is North America, and I would like to invite Janine Yazzie to share with us. Please, Janine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rodion, and thank you to my colleagues who delivered such powerful and important interventions. My name is Janine Yazzie. I am Dene, coming to you all from my traditional homelands of the Dene people and the Southwest United States. And I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy for Indian Collective, a movement organization that is based out of Rapid City, South Dakota. And a large part of our work has been in developing the mechanisms necessary to support the self-determination of Indigenous peoples. And we do that through 3 pillars: to defend, develop, and decolonize. And I bring this up because it's vitally important for the vision that Indigenous peoples have in creating alternatives to these very unsustainable systems that are leading to all of these rights violations, to be able to do these things and exercise and develop their solutions in ways that support their vision for their communities, for their peoples, and that exercise their self-determination. And it's in that way that we create rights-based approaches to things like renewable energy development that are rooted in many of the principles and protocols that were so beautifully articulated, as Galina presented, by a global group of Indigenous peoples in Geneva, Switzerland this past October. It's been clear from the presentations of my colleagues that there are many similarities faced by Indigenous peoples across the 7 socio-cultural regions of the globe when it comes to this push to implement renewable energy. It should also be emphasized that Indigenous peoples have been the champions of climate change solutions, of the need to establish stricter, more ambitious climate goals, and have been raising the alarm about the unsustainable systems and the unjust systems that are negatively impacting all sacred life, including our peoples, our nations around the globe. And despite this, the transition that has been implemented does not represent many of the goals and the calls to actions that Indigenous peoples have been championing in order to address this shared crisis. Because the just transition framework, as it's being promoted by many governments, and especially as it's been promoted and articulated in North America, becomes a framework that solely focuses on jobs, on maintaining the status quo, on ensuring continued monopolization, power, and control of energy companies, and doesn't really adequately address some fundamental questions we need to ask about consumption, about the efficiency of existing energy infrastructure and energy grids, and about the waste, the rampant waste that is caused by energy infrastructure. Neither does it address the root injustices that have come from resource colonization and energy colonization and the legacy that has left across Indigenous communities and Indigenous nations and lands and waters across North America and beyond. And for that reason, we are seeing so many inadequate solutions being put forward that don't get to the fundamental rights issues that Indigenous peoples have been trying to get addressed with more holistic, sustainable approaches to renewable energy development and to supporting climate change solutions. There's so many different examples that I could pit about those impacts, and I know we have time constraints. So I saw many important representatives from groups and organizations based in North America join this webinar, and I invite you at this time to include in the chat some of the examples of the ways that your peoples are impacted negatively by renewable energy projects, but to also, if you have projects that you are putting forward, to also share that information too, because there's no way I would be able to cover all of them. But a few examples of the negative impacts to Indigenous peoples as a result of renewable energy really comes from the renewed investments and the national push to look at mining of critical minerals as a national security issue. And there have been different areas of resistance led by Indigenous peoples to halt these destructive practices, but unfortunately have continued to create precedents that is privileging these national interests over the rights of Indigenous peoples. One such example is the campaign to save Oak Flats, territory that is very sacred and important to Apache peoples and to several different surrounding tribes. and that has significant biological and ecological purposes for climate resiliency in the Southwest. And that project is being carried out by Resolution Copper, which is a subsidiary of Rio Tinto as well as BHP, players that we know have caused devastation in many parts around the globe when it comes to Indigenous peoples, for the purpose of mining copper ore. Then we have the Blythe Mesa Solar Project, which is a project that's been carried out by Renewable Resources Group, that was opposed by the Colorado River Indian Tribe. And again, the judge ruled in favor of the company and federal agencies because the national renewable energy targets were considered more important than the rights violations of the Indigenous peoples that were impacted by that project. And then we're seeing more as this push to transition to renewable energy continues to be pushed by corporate and federal interests. We have the Plan de Sonora in Mexico. We have lithium mining and deposits being targeted on the Navajo Nation in the Black Hills and in Nevada at Thacker Pass. And a lot of this is because, like, globally, 54% of critical minerals are found on our near Indigenous peoples' lands. In the United States, 89% of copper reserves, 79% of lithium, 97% of nickel, and 68% of cobalt resources are within 35 miles, are adjacent to Indigenous peoples' lands and territories. And that doesn't even include the deep sea mineral deposits that are being targeted as well, just off the coast, across the West Coast, in the Pacific, off the Alaska coast, that also impact Indigenous peoples, territories, peoples, and ways of living. And on top of this, on top of these continued practices, we're seeing an increased threat for the renewal and resurgence of uranium mining, processing, milling to support nuclear energy, which has been deemed a transitional energy to help with the move towards renewable energy resources. All of this goes to show how the current trajectory of just transition, as led by states and corporations, do not fundamentally address the needs that we hold, not only as Indigenous peoples, but as humanity, for alternative approaches to renewable energy development that is rights-based and that is justice-based. And so when we look at efforts that have been led by Indigenous peoples, there have been efforts to completely reevaluate just transition from the perspective of Indigenous peoples' life ways, value systems, and sense of responsibility, understanding of responsibility to Mother Earth in all forms of sacred life. And that's where we get a lot of the language that's in the Just Transition Outcome document. I've had the pleasure of working with Dene-centered research for evaluation based out of the Southwest United States, led by Dene traditional knowledge holders and elders, who put forward the concept of just transformation, because recognizing that the just transition and moving from one path into a slightly different one, but still continuing on the status quo practices that are bringing such destruction to our ecosystems and to our people, is not the vision that we hold for our people and for future generations. And in that, we're seeing the emergence with that concept in mind of beautiful projects that are led by Indigenous peoples. One of my favorite is Old Crow Solar Project, based in the Yukon, in which Indigenous peoples designed and developed their own energy project. Oh, there's my time. Their own energy project that protected the permafrost, that restored the local ecology, or protected the local ecology and plants that were important for the people and for the wildlife. That was designed in a culturally significant way, and that led to the first power purchasing agreement that centered community benefits for the Old Crow Reservation. We see the same with Navajo Power, with Native Renewables, with all sorts of different Indigenous-led renewable energy companies, because they start a lot of their development answering the question, what do we need energy for? And the design and implementation is about centering the well-being preserving and the protection of all sacred life, as well as centering community benefits of those that are most impacted. And it's with that pathway forward that we can find solutions that not just benefit Indigenous peoples, but that benefit all peoples in Mother Earth. And that is the theory of change for Indian Collective, and why we will continue to support efforts like this and to support Indigenous-led projects, because they are the most effective and efficient way to help address the legacy of contamination and violent impacts to Earth and to peoples from the status quo and the way things have been developed, and provide a pathway forward that restores our wholeness to ourselves and to all peoples and planet.
Thank you very much, Julian, for your very holistic and also some positive practice and examples. So much appreciated. And now we are moving to the last speaker from Pacific, Tenaje. Please, Tenaje, the floor is yours. So is Tenaje here?
Oh, he's not on the line, Rodion.
Oh, okay, because I was seeing him, right? But maybe it was some technical issue. Okay, so we have, I think, about 10 minutes for our dialogue, for some exchange and contribution from participant. I'm having quite difficult how we can move forward because I see several questions raised through webinar chat, but also through our separate chat related to questions particular. And also, I'm so glad that we can use this webinar as a networking, because it's so useful to connect people, region by region, organization to organization. And looking at question chat, I would like to raise, I think, 2 questions, because it sounds quite general and related to all region, to all speakers. The first one related to nature-based solution. So, and I invite all speakers just provide your feedback. And also one of the last one to bring indigenous contribution and positive initiatives under the and positive practice under the green economy. There's 2 general questions I would like to address to all regions. I'm so sorry because there are some specific questions to specific regions, but it's up to speakers to pick up and then provide your response because of time pressure. But I would like to invite again to have a second round of discussion and give the floor to all of you, just for 1 maximum 2 minutes. Okay, and then we come to conclusion. So who would like to start to respond to general questions or to one specific question related to specific regions? Just raise your hand or just to open your mic.
Hello?
Yes, Desalegn, please.
Okay. Thank you. Can I go ahead, please?
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rodion. I have seen a couple of questions from the participants. One anonymous participant and the others from the other colleagues from Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Kenya. And I found that their questions are very instrumental, and there is somehow similarity on their questions. So I try to address them all. So as far as the issue of the indigenous governance is concerned, for instance, in Ethiopia, and in my indigenous community, there is an indigenous governance on natural resource like forests, sacred sites, where there are huge mineral resources, and also there is a huge carbon sink. So if these indigenous, this is kept for since time immemorial and transferred from generation to generation through indigenous knowledge system and protected by our ancestors who transferred that knowledge to us through oral tradition. And it's now our responsibility to document this and to protect this and to transfer the governance system and also to mainstream that. It has to be mainstreamed and it has to be included as part of the governance system of the natural resource, the forests, the lands, and the water bodies to make the just transition just as it is. So without this, I think it is unlikely for the global community in general, and Africa, and in Ethiopia, and my local authorities in particular, to ensure inclusive, sound, and acceptable governance system. And another question that came from Kenya with regard to the wind power generation, which was mentioned as the largest wind power in Africa. Yes, in Africa, you know, in particular, and all the indigenous territories in general, I feel that there is land grabbing, not also land grabbing, but also life grabbing, because when the government and the corporations approach the indigenous territories in the name of investment, they are grabbing the future of the indigenous children. They are also affecting the ecosystems, which is instrumental for the coexistence and the safety of the future. So what, as the question from the Nigeria just focused on the approach, the strategy. So I think we need to demonstrate our solidarity to be voiced to one another. And it requires more advocacy. It requires more capacity building. Also, it requires sound projects that have capacity to uplift the indigenous communities and to ensure just transition with inclusive participation. Because without the indigenous peoples' engagement, all the projects that might be designed by the government and the companies might not bring the meaningful impact. So we need to be more proactive, and we need to put our hands together, and it requires more advocacy, policy advocacy, dialogue, and we need to be proactive in this respect. So I think I have tried to address the questions, but because of the time constraint, I think I cannot go further than this. Back to you, Mr. Rodion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your understanding and for valuable contribution. So one more, I would like to invite to respond different question raised. One of the question was related, I already mentioned, nature-based solution, and also one is related to what is our feedback related our strategy working with totalitarian regimes? And what are your views on sustainable and just transition for agri-food system? But again, it's up to you. You can choose your question related to your specific region or just in general, but just be very short and focus in terms of time. Appreciate very much. Thank you.
I can give it a try. Pesca here. For agriculture, we don't have agriculture in very big regard in our region. But regarding, and I think Tesala was mentioning it quite properly, the means of indigenous peoples' governance, and also knowledge and technology, as it's written also in the outcome document. I think we have to make sure to, even though the governments and the states and the colonizers don't recognize or don't take into account our knowledge or governance structures, that we at least keep them going, because there will come a time, and there is already a time where our knowledge is needed. The latest example I can see in the news is the fires in LA, for example, where indigenous peoples are mentioned that we abandoned those practices, so now the city is burning. Only when the city burns, then they realize the knowledge that indigenous people really have, and in reality the world is burning. So I hope that more and more governments and also more and more peoples will understand and see that it's the only smart way forward is to acknowledge indigenous people's rights, systems, and knowledges. So I will maybe end it at that, because time is running, and I could talk for hours. But that would be my main point now. We have the means, we have the knowledge, and most importantly, we want to help the land and make the land justice. Only by that we can make justice for the peoples on the land.
Thank you, Bhaskar. Quite clear. So I see Galina, Lakpa, and then I believe Janine will be the last, and then we will come to conclusion. Please, Galina.
Yeah, very shortly about nature-based solutions. I have a question. What do we mean by nature-based solutions? Is it defined by indigenous peoples, or is it defined by governments and corporations? And from what I've seen, the term comes very strongly from the corporate actors, right? And from the governments. And what they mean by that, it's carbon credits, carbon storage, carbon technologies that suck the carbon out of the air. I forgot the exact name for those technologies. I don't really follow them very closely. But I think that for indigenous peoples, the nature-based solutions are land-based solutions, right? Everything that we do is connected to our Mother Earth. It's the agriculture, traditional agriculture. It's the mangrove forests that indigenous peoples have been stewarding since the time immemorial. So there are 54 types of mangroves around the world, and they are one of the best technologies that absorb massively the CO2 from the air. It's the kelp production. It's everything that has to do with land-based solutions are nature-based solutions, but not as defined by the corporations and the governments. Just very quickly. Thank you.
Thanks, Galina. Yeah, very clear. Lakpa.
Yeah, thank you, Galina, for that. Just on the food systems and indigenous people's contributions, for me, I think there is still a very strong stereotype among the policymakers in terms of the way they look at on the indigenous people's contributions and the way they look at on the traditional livelihoods of indigenous peoples. One thing that we should celebrate at this point of time is because of the international advocacy work. We have been able to set that narrative at the international level, right? Indigenous peoples are leaders, like the rights of indigenous peoples has to be at central. I mean, that narrative is set. But then if you come to the national level, that narrative becomes very, very weak when you sit with the policymakers. For example, like the point that Vieska was also making on fire, when there is any livelihood system that entails fire, for example, policymakers would automatically say, oh, there is an emission of carbon dioxide. This practice is very bad, right? And I think the mindset of the policymakers in terms of, instead of recognizing and promoting, but there is a detrimental laws and policies that discourage, that prohibits, that criminalize the traditional livelihoods of Indigenous peoples, which actually contributes to food sovereignty, which actually contributes to biodiversity conservation. So what I think is really important for us to is, now we need to really build the capacity of policymakers, because they have always been telling Indigenous peoples it's capacity building, right? But I think it's like the other way around. If the world really wants to have the contribution from Indigenous peoples, if they really want leadership of Indigenous peoples to be at the central, in not just in just transition, but in the whole discussion of environmental crisis, they have to be educated. They have to start learning, right? The Indigenous people's ways of living and the Indigenous people's knowledge system that are actually contributing to this. So I think it's really important to change that, because I see a lot of those things also in the education system. That's where the policymakers read it, and then that's where the mindset is framed, right? So yeah, just to end with that, saying that sensitization of policymakers at the national level is really key if we really want that international agreements to be implemented. Thank you, Rodion.
Thank you a lot. It's so valuable. Yeah, sorry, Janine, I would like to give floor to Jacqueline, because the interpreter is still with us. So, and then, but Jacqueline tried to be quite short, okay? And then we will conclude after Janine. Please, Jacqueline. You are muted. We don't hear you. You are muted. Yes.
Perdón.
I'm sorry.
Bueno, quiero
Okay.
referirme,
I just want to refer to what the nation has when it comes to the territorial
se han devuelto los ríos. También
guarding.
hay una
There's been a
hemos rescatado las
river
semillas
back action.
tradicionales en
We
contra
have
de lo que ha
rescued
hecho
the traditional
muchos estados,
seeds.
que es firmar el
We
tratado
have
del
also
TTP-11.
pushed the state to
Bueno,
sign
eso
the treaty,
en
the
la actualidad nos ha
TT-11
servido
treaty.
en
And this in
el periodo de
reality has
pandemia,
helped
sirvió mucho a
during
que
the
las comunidades indígenas
pandemic period.
o
It
los pueblos
allowed the
originarios
indigenous
del
communities
país
and the
han
original
llevado
peoples
alimentación a
to
sus
take
poblaciones
food
que
to the
necesitan
populations that were
raciones de alimentos.
devastated
Eso.
and with the lack of food throughout that time. I just wanted to mention that much.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Very well helped. Yes, Janine, please.
Yeah, just to build off what our relatives are saying, this is why we have consistently advocated for white space approaches to development. The nature-based solutions and the ways that that framework has been co-opted and driven by corporate interests is the same way that the efforts to grant personhood to river systems or to seeds is also being co-opted by corporate interests and by states. And the simple thing I like to pose to people is just that Indigenous peoples have recognized rights. We have human rights, and yet these legal, political, and economic mechanisms continue to violate them. Creating a new legal structure to advocate for these solutions is not the answer, but holding firm to the full implementation, respect, and recognition of Indigenous peoples' rights and human rights is a fundamental importance. And I just wanted to bring that forward because we're talking about renewable energy and critical mineral mining, but critical mineral mining is also going to be expanded and expedited in order to support the development of of AI technology and AI data centers. And already we are seeing this new threat target Indigenous peoples' lands, territories, and resources to meet this manufactured demand for the use of AI technology and data mining. The largest of which that's being proposed right now is impacting Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation in Canada. And this is a $70 billion investment in this data center. So there's big money behind these things. And this is why we need philanthropy and all of those who care about these issues and just pathways forward to keep funding and resourcing Indigenous peoples and Indigenous-led solutions directly. And to do so using Indigenous-led designed and developed funding mechanisms. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Janine. And let me conclude. And first, I would like to all regions, all speakers, for your very powerful presentation and sharings. Secondly, I would like to thank all participants. Maybe this is the first time I see hundreds participants online to join. For me, it's also a strong message to all of us. This is very timely and it's very critical. And I believe we will try to continue and this such kind of webinars, global but also regional. And my final comments, we have to acknowledge that the green economy is here to stay. And its success depends on inclusiveness. But it also means that just transition is not just Indigenous people issue. It's a human rights issue. It's an environmental issue. It's a development issue. So, and summit was a time of solidarity and shared purpose. But now the next time is to bridge, to lobby, to work together, and to alliance. So let's do it together. And I think we are just at the beginning. And thank you very much for your time, for your commitment, and see you soon. And of course, thank you our interpreters. Thank you also Brian for bringing us together and all our partners. Bye and have a good morning, afternoon, and good night.